Good afternoon, John.
Hi, Marty.
Good to get together with you in our weekly podcast as we explore our lives using the accountability practice.
Yes.
And being willing to share our ignorance and revel in our character defects together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a remarkable thing.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And know what we know. And
Yeah.
like you said, know what that I don't know.
Yeah. And as I also say, and I'm willing not to know.
Right.
So much of what we've experienced in our lives as we explore our childhood traumatic psychological structures is how easily and frequently, I'll just speak for myself, I retreat into thought and intellectual pursuits as a way of avoiding feeling and a way of being grounded.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanna say that after copious amounts of owning my truth, doing the accountability process, character defects, that I find myself in that thought place, only it's coming from a different place. It's coming from inside, and it's expansive and new and surprising, and it's that beyond what I could have understood how to ask for. I want this to happen this way, and yet I find myself in this space that is rich, abundant, and full, and active. I used to think that if I don't think, I would be inactive. I would be boring or not paying attention or doing something wrong. And in my feeling body, the thought process, the thoughts are prolific, active, subtle, sometimes blinding, like depths of, and it's not so much understanding, like, oh, I got this. It's like a picture that I get to be with. And what I know of this is that whatever I'm experiencing, the bigness of what I'm experiencing is, as long as I can stay in the accountability tree practice process, will continue to expand. And I want more. I want to be in that expansive place where something that I've believed I've learned, I find another depth and breadth and spaciousness in that same thing that didn't dawn on me before. Like, I like that word dawn, in the morning, dawn, dawns on me. It's like the sun coming out of darkness, there's light, that kind of stuff. And I'm actually experiencing the, what do you call it? There's a word I'm looking for. The essence of Dawn's a New Age on a daily basis. And then we come together again and explore and talk about accountability process, the place where people find themselves in disempowering attitudes and obsessions or compulsive behaviors, and wondering, like, what do you do with this mess? And mostly what they're told is to either take a medication or try harder. And both those just lead to more misery and constriction. So, wow.
Yeah, so what I hear, or what I interpret as I listen, joyfully to your description, is that the work we're engaged in here, the work I'm engaged in here, is to be able to notice the dawn.
Yeah.
Because when I'm in that constricted childhood traumatic complex PTSD world, there is the light has been predefined by me as darkness.
Right.
Because I have to stay safe, I have to stay small, I have to stay cocooned in order to survive. It's a little kid. Little kid has basically been told, don't be joyful, don't go to the light, stay in the darkness, you're safer there. And so it's a part of the, I think, the wonder, as you were describing this, and you were allowing my definition of what you were doing, you were allowing your contact with this truth to just express itself in this particular languaging.
Yeah. It's this
you might
place,
not have been able to do that 25 years ago.
Absolutely not. I didn't know this existed or that I could ask for it. And in that space, what I'm experiencing internally is no pre-thought, no agenda, no right
compulsive
thing, wrong
thinking.
thing. Right. It just simply flows out, and I do my best to stay up with it. And I like the way I do that. I just listen, and it's not I don't know how to explain it. It's not a listening thing. It's an action. It's a manifestation of my connectedness to source energy, higher self, higher power. It's like another dimension. Yeah, that feels right. It's another dimension of being.
One way that I language this, see what this does for you, but it's as if we start out with an emotional body, and that's ages 3 months before we're born till adolescence. And then somewhere around 5, thinking starts, and thinking comes out of the emotional body. So the mental body comes out of the emotional body. The emotional body is going to determine a lot of the way we think about ourselves and our world. And then that may be all we have through the rest of our lives. Of course, there's the reasoning part of the thinking part that can analyze and figure out how to get from here to there, and how to pay our bills, and how to behave in our job, and all those kinds of things. But there's also this other part that's always been there, that's waiting to come into awareness, and that's what I call the intuitive, and which I think is what you're talking about. And even little kids have intuition, and we don't know what that is. And we're often, again, told not to let that intuition get too out of hand. And then we grow into the rational thinking adults, and intuition becomes even less accessible to us.
Right.
I mean, so things show up and we go, WTF, where'd that come from? And particularly if we're lucky enough to have a sense of our particular gift. And when we're doing our particular gift, regardless of all the other neurosis and so forth, sometimes we allow ourselves to be free in that gift.
Mm-hmm.
But because we haven't developed the relationship between our thinking and emotional mind, we don't know how to see it. We don't know how to view it. We don't know how to appreciate it. It's almost as if it's equally separate. Our thinking, we separate our feelings, yes, our thinking, our intuition. What accountability does, the gift for me of accountability was teaching me to notice on all of these levels by starting back in the emotional.
Yes.
To start at the beginning. The emotional body is the beginning body. And it's got this intuitive wisdom, which it can't use. Just as you were there struggling to express it, the emotional body has no words or language. It just has feelings. So it can only feel the intuitive body. Mm-hmm. Now we have this thinking thing that developed. Now we can talk about the intuitive experience, mm-hmm, using our thinking mind, because we haven't yet got to the point, and this is partly what I wrote my book about, we haven't got to the point where we see the intuitive body as one. not your intuitive body and my intuitive body, but an intuitive body that expresses through us all equally.
Yes.
That,
yeah.
as I suggest in my book, Creating Our World, that's where we're heading. To intentional living being not just for us as individuals, but intentional living being for us as a species, as a whole.
Absolutely. And still safeguarding the diversity or the individual I.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've been working eons to develop the capacity for I separate from you. And it's a part of the evolutionary process. What I know now is that I think I was listening to Eckhart Tolle, and he was talking about ego and how everybody wants to get rid of the ego. And his statement was, what I've come to find is that it is my goal to get the ego in alignment with that higher source, intuitive place, that emotional place. The universe has worked really hard, 13.5 billion years as we know it, what we do know about it, to create the environment so that I can talk to that I, Marty,
right,
and maintain our separateness and yet come together at the same time.
But I would, I thought I heard you say, use the word protect, and I would suggest that when we get to that level of ease with who we are and mastery, we actually won't work on protecting it anymore because it no longer needs protection.
Correct.
There's no threat against which it needs protection. What we're naturally now drawn to is to identify as all of it, to identify now as humanity, and now humanity is what needs protecting. Humanity needs to be nurtured and cared for, so that we all of us, this is the Bodhisattva Principle from Buddhism, so that we all develop the capacity to live intentionally, and not just as a series of individuals, but as a species as a whole.
Yes.
That in some kind of way, there becomes a unifying appreciation, a unifying intuition that everyone has access to. Don't ask me how this is going to work. I have no idea, because it's evolutionary. And by definition, what that means is what comes next, we have no clue of. This goes to what we were talking about earlier. I know what I don't know. This is what I don't know. It's like,
right. Yeah.
All I know, though, is that if I were to put myself back 14,000 years, when tribal consciousness was just beginning, when agriculture was just beginning, none of this would have been understood, would have been foreseeable. No. What we're doing now would have been utterly unforeseeable.
Right. Or uncomprehendable. Nobody, it would have been like, even if we had the same language, we'd have been talking.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet we could have intuited, because early on, people started intuiting this possibility, although they couldn't describe it, they couldn't put words to it, but they had a sense that the world they were living in was capable of being transcended into something even glorious, more glorious.
Yes.
Or to use Ken Wilber's language, a deeper level of consciousness than the one they were occupying.
Correct. Yeah, I like that term, deeper. That's my experience, is that it's deeper and broader.
Yeah. And it's clearer. It's got a clarity to it.
Yeah. It absolutely does.
One of the students of psychological consciousness evolution that Ken Wilber cites is a Swiss scholar named Jean Gebser, who passed on in the early 80s, I think. And he uses the term, he uses this adjective, he says it's diaphanous. We entered to a place of diaphaneity, where you can see the veil, and you can see right through it at the same time. It's what diaphanous means. So it goes to that what we were talking earlier, so that the individual persona becomes diaphanous. I see myself, but I see through myself into the larger at the same time.
Yeah.
So now we're into both and rather than either or.
Wow. Yeah. I like that picture. That
Free of charge.
Okay, cool. So
we talked about before we, just to go back to basics,
yeah,
I was sharing with you, one of our members turned us onto this book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. And I started reading it, and we started looking at it on our Monday night meeting. It's not necessarily new in the sense that a lot of this stuff was originally shared for me in Vander Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. But it's just another gentleman taking a look at this through the eyes of his own experience, both personally and professionally. And it's another 10 years after Body Keeps the Score, so there's another decade of research that's now become available. So what he does for me in this book, which I don't see quite as much in The Body Keeps the Score, is he gives us the understanding of how post-traumatic stress disorder, which you did a really great job helping me see some, giving me some clarity in the conversation with Dan that we did a couple weeks ago on this. It's post-traumatic stress that causes the disorder. In other words, trauma that never got relieved, so it just turned into stress, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that when we have this in a continuous environment in our childhood and our families of origin, that's why it's called complex, because it's not one incident, as often happens to a soldier in combat who is in an explosion or some kind of death situation, sees his buddies die or has to kill people.
Right.
Those can be single enormous stressors that cause trauma,
right,
as a singular event, powerful enough to create PTSD going forward if it's not treated. This is more like the death of 1,000 paper cuts of PTSD.
Yes.
Little ongoing incidents of trauma that over time just add up into the necessity to create a defense.
Yes. Wow.
And he goes into the first chapter, he goes into how it's the 4 F's we develop: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn or please.
Right.
And explains how those are just the basic responses. And from that, you can begin to build awareness of your own process of what happened by seeing how you react in stressful situations. It's like my primary tendency is flight, and my secondary tendency is to please.
Yep.
Others, I know, I can see it now that I understand this. I got the key. I can see friends who have a primary tendency to fight. I've seen people just freeze, become numb, dissociated.
Yep.
And I've seen people do the people-pleasing thing, try to mold themselves into something acceptable in the face of stress or danger.
Yep. Yep. And I'll come. Yeah, the experiences of my own experience living with 2 traumatized individuals who had not a clue that they were traumatized, either accepting life as the way it is. Like, I'm thinking of my mother, women have a plate, that's her place, she's just got to get over it. And then my father, although he He was diagnosed schizophrenic, struggling internally with his demons, and not capable of nurturing children. So yeah, and it's a lifetime of, well, childhood time of that immersion into this combat zone where you didn't know what was going to happen next. And even if you did think you figured it out and you did that, it was the rules changed. Now that was no longer good. It's worked for you last time, but this time it's like, yeah, not good. So there's hypervigilance, stress, adrenaline, cortisoids. And then I found myself at 65 with 2 types of cancer, and yeah.
So he has one of the things I learned in the very first chapter, the 3rd page of the book, is the concept of, again, I knew this, I just never knew the word,
Right.
of emotional flashback. He says, C for complex, CPTSD is a more severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is delineated from this better-known trauma syndrome by 5 of its most common and troublesome features: emotional flashbacks, toxic shame, self-abandonment, a vicious inner critic, and social anxiety.
Wow.
He says emotional flashbacks are perhaps the most noticeable and characteristic feature of CPTSD. Survivors of traumatizing abandonment are extremely susceptible to painful emotional flashbacks, which, unlike PTSD, do not typically have a visual component. Emotional flashbacks are sudden and often prolonged regressions to the overwhelming feeling states. This is the central point. Feeling states of being an abused, abandoned child. These feeling states can include overwhelming fear, shame, alienation, rage, grief, and depression. They also include unnecessary triggering of our fight-flight instincts. It is important to state here that emotional flashbacks, like most things in life, are not all or nothing. Flashbacks can range in intensity from subtle to horrific. They can also vary in duration, ranging from moments to weeks on end, where they devolve into what many therapists call a regression. So the way I read that is that the term he uses, emotional flashback, is that experience I have when you say something and I experience this from a completely earlier regressive defensive situation.
Yep.
You said, I don't have time to go to the theater tonight, and I hear, you don't love me.
Right.
That's that all of a sudden flashback of that unresolved traumatic experience, now again in the present moment, utterly disconnected from the actual social transaction that would have occurred if I weren't triggered by this flashback. And so I find the term quite useful.
Yeah. I have the example I use, I got a different meaning to it as you were talking. The example I use is the toast is burnt.
Right.
And then I go into this tirade.
Right.
Well, as you were talking, what came to me in my family of origin, we lived hand to mouth. So if the toast was burnt, that meant we lost food. So somebody did go to fight, flight, freeze, life or death situation, because we only had so much. And my parents had 4 young boy mouths to feed. And so I can see my frustration or my intolerance around what I might term wasted food, even though in my life now, burnt toast isn't that big a deal. I remember in our kitchen, we had a chest of drawers, a short chest of drawers, and we threw all our bread in there. And when food was scarce, we'd go rummage through the old bread sacks to find the Wonder white bread, cardboard, and then make some kind of food out of that.
Mhm.
So toasted burn's a big deal back then, and pertinent to that, to my childhood, absolutely not in my adult life.
Right.
And I would what you call flashback to, and not have anything to like describe what happened because it's in my subconscious.
For the newcomer, let's complete the picture, John. And what you're talking about here is your partner, your kid, somebody burns the toast, and you have a flash of rage or fear. I don't know what your experience is. That's all out of proportion to the immediate situation, but it's utterly connected to this previous situation.
Childhood situation, yes. Yeah.
And
And my response isn't in alignment with what's happening. If burnt toast is like on a scale of 1 to 10, and maybe a 0.03.
right.
And I'm jumping up an 8, going rageful or screaming, yelling, or demeaning or diminishing somebody, when no, it's like, okay, put another piece in, you know.
Right. Or scrape it off and try again.
That's what we used to have to do. Good thing,
right?
Sometimes it was burned through and through.
So maybe the listener can get how that's an emotional flashback.
Yes,
it's emotional, and it's a flash from the past.
Right.
And in the language that we use here, it's from an unresolved trauma.
Correct.
So fear of not being able to eat. No one said, that's okay, dear, we'll handle it. Or the opposite may have occurred. You may have gotten yelled at because you burnt the toast, and now you are the shameful cause of people starving, and you're selfish, and you're lazy and stupid,
Right.
or whatever.
Yep.
Whatever would have been heaped upon the transgressor of the toaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
And so now here it is 40 years later, and boom.
Yeah.
There's a war raging where seconds before it was completely peaceful and calm.
Right. And the healing allowed me to simply be where I'm at and stay in the situation as it comes to me. And I can notice on the low scale 1, 2 is just 1, 2 maybe needs a comment. Or if I am in a situation that's 7, 8, 9, I can take action, proaction, as for the 12 steps. Put it simply, move from reactor to actor. And that's what we're talking about.
So would you be willing to let's illustrate this for the newcomer by how we could apply the accountability tree to this particular situation?
Okay, you're going to pull it up?
Well, no, I wasn't. I was just going to but you start talking and I'll go find it.
Actually, if you give me I got it on my.
Well, actually, I got I got
okay.
it.
So the process is, we'll stay with the burnt toast, is that I just simply name this behavior as mean or dismissive, or another way to say it is out of line, but out of line is a judgment. So yeah, there you go, accountability. So I just say the truth about where I find myself in my current reality. Dismissive, or I'm screaming and yelling. And I just say the truth, and it says on both sides, no blame, no judgment. I'm just stating the data of where I find myself as an adult, knowing that the scream and yelling is in alignment with the trauma. So I'm not beating myself up, and I'm simply saying I'm mean. And when I say I'm mean, say the truth, that puts me in an emotional state, which reconnects me to my emotional body where that old information is held. and there's a frequency change in the truth. Instead of violent behavior, being mean and screaming and yelling is violent behavior. Instead of beat myself up for the behavior, I simply say the truth about my behavior. I mean, connects me to my emotional body, which is connected to that subconscious pool of trauma, which then acknowledges the trauma, whether I have details for it or not. Sometimes I do. And I find myself taking a breath and saying with intent, it is my intent to be kind. It is my intent to be flexible. Whatever is pertinent to the situation. And that saying the truth, I'm mean, I'm violent, and then feeling that and then saying it is my intent to be kind, fuses with that old trauma, unresolved trauma, resolves it, and then sets it back down into my subconscious pool of information. So the next time the toast is burnt, I have a different pool of information that I'm associated with, and the intensity goes down and down to where I find myself interacting in my life situationally to the degree that it's approaching me. So a 2 stays a 2. I don't go down to 0, like leave the room, or I don't jump up to 8, 9, 10, scream and yell. I stay in the room with the people I say I love. I'm in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. They say when you're in an adrenaline rush or post-situation, post-stress, you lose yourself. The identity, who you are, goes away. You're associated as a child, don't know it. You lose the situation, the interaction, and you lose the other person. And they become, for me, they became my oppressor, the people messing with me, the people that I needed to defend myself against. So in this process of accountability, I mean, take a breath, it is my intent to be kind. I regain myself. I put myself back in the situation, which is a 0.03, and I see the other person, either my partner or one of my children, who are just being people and having a lapse of whatever, and that's part of being, and we resolve the issue at the moment.
Right. Yeah, there might not even be a lapse, just might be a mistake.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Something slipped out of their hand and broke on the floor. It's
Right.
like, okay, the jar was wet, the glass was,
Yeah.
And then we just moved to resolve it and clean up the mess, and or nobody gets demeaned and diminished and ridiculed and
Having emotional violence perpetrated
upon them, and or do it to myself. If I drop the jar, start with
well, and the truth is, we talked about this before, but again, for the newcomer, the truth is, when I do violence to you, I do violence to myself, and vice versa.
Yes.
Violence is an all what's the term here? It's an all pervasive dynamic.
And it covers all demographics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just like love. If I love myself, I'm going to love others.
Yes.
It's one of those things that's not really divisible, although again, back to what we talked about at the beginning, mentally we can compartmentalize these things and pretend, or we can create a believable, rational definition that says, no, if I hurt myself, that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
Because we're not seeing and feeling into the bigger picture.
Correct.
But the truth is, oftentimes, when I'm in these kinds of situations, I want to hurt you, and what I don't see is when I want to hurt you, I'm creating separation for me as well as you.
Yes.
That hurts me, even though the little kid thinks he's now being safe by pushing the other person away, pushing you away. This is another reason why you might consider this stuff complex, because it defies logic at least on the surface. When you first encounter these things, it defies logic.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting the other night and someone was saying, well, how could a 5-year-old want pain? Well, how could a 5-year-old choose pain?
Well,
And it's like, well, from a perspective of logic, nobody chooses pain, and yet we do.
yeah.
So that was another one of the things that you really helped me appreciate when I came to the accountability practice, is the distinction between the conscious and the subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And where the vast majority of what's going on in me right now, as I'm talking to you, is in my subconscious.
Right.
The good news is through this process, we can dip into the subconscious, bring it up for examination and healing, which is exactly what the accountability tree allows us to do.
Right.
By stating the truth. Truth is, I burnt the toast. Okay, what's the real truth? Well, the people who burn toast are selfish, stupid idiots.
Right.
Okay, so how do I feel when I own that I'm a selfish, stupid idiot? And there's that feeling, shame, whatever
Mm-hmm.
shows up. Now, this which until this moment was not aware, not in my awareness, becomes into my awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It was always there in my subconscious, going all the way back to the very first time I burnt the toast.
Right.
And I got called stupid, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not in my consciousness. The beauty of this process is that it allows us to bring up those things that would otherwise not be brought up, because it's dangerous to bring them up. So they just stay in the background as a little defense mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
keeping me safe, but also keeping me disconnected and unloved.
Yeah.
So now it comes into my consciousness, and now all kinds of possibilities open up by being able to tell the truth. And I love the way that you say, so we now return it to the subconscious with this new intentionality now attached to it. And so it's not what it was before we brought it into the light. It's now
Right.
been changed, even if it's only a little bit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Actually, it matters a whole lot. A little bit.
Right.
A 1-degree angle change in eyesight opens up a whole universe
Exactly.
further out you go.
So it's, for me, that the process over the years of doing this leads me back to what we talked about at the top of the hour, which is into this dawn where light is seeping everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And not just light of information. Information's good. I like information, don't get me wrong. But also it's just the light of joy of expressing whatever wants to be expressed.
Yeah, life, and chances to bond and enjoy each other and learn about each other and
make something new that had never existed before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the things that we went over last night in this book is he has this thing called the Human Bill of Rights. And there's 21 of them. I think we could add, John. I think you and I could add a few, but it starts out with, I have the right to be treated with respect. I have the right to say no.
I like that one.
I have the right to make mistakes.
Yep.
To reject unsolicited advice or feedback.
Yep.
I have the right to negotiate for change.
Mm-hmm.
I have the right to change my mind or my plans.
Yep.
I have a right to change my circumstances or course of action.
Mm-hmm.
I have the right to have my own feelings, beliefs, opinions, preferences, etc. I have the right to protest sarcasm, destructive criticism, or unfair treatment. Oh, I like this one, John. I have a right to feel angry and to express it non-abusively.
Yep.
I have a right to refuse to take responsibility for anyone else's problems. I have a right to refuse to take responsibility for anybody's behavior. I have a right to feel ambivalent and to occasionally be inconsistent. I personally would take the occasionally out there. I have a right to be inconsistent whenever I want.
Right.
I have a right to play, waste time, and not be productive.
I like that one.
I know that gets people.
Yeah.
This caused a great conversation last night. I have a right to occasionally be childlike and immature. I have a right to complain about life's unfairnesses and injustices. I have a right to occasionally be irrational in safe ways. I have a right to seek healthy and mutually supportive relationships. I have a right to ask friends for help and emotional support. I have a right to complain and verbally ventilate in moderation. And the last one he writes here is, I have a right to grow, evolve, and prosper. Now, the truth is, the only person who can guarantee me these rights is me.
Yep.
And that's what accountability does for me. It allows me to activate these things, calls them rights or call them capacities or whatever, so that if I do something, if I make a mistake, let's use that one, I have a right to make mistakes, then the inner critic sort of like, I don't care that you say I shouldn't do that. I did it. And in fact, I give myself permission to do it again.
Yeah, those are good. I'm glad you read those.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the goal of this work, is to know and manifest these rights in your life with ease.
Have them become second nature.
Yes.
The way having emotional flashbacks is of second nature.
Today, yeah.
Automatic. And the way that's done is by bringing the beliefs that are contrary to these into the light, out of my subconscious, so that I can work through them.
Right.
I remember one time in our early men's group, we were working with one of our colleagues who just had this obsessive thing about, I have to get this done. And you said, this is my memory, John, you might have a different memory, but you said something effective. I want to give you some homework. Oh yeah, what's that? I said, well, the homework is don't do anything for the next week.
Right. Yeah.
Do nothing.
Do nothing.
And it's like the body language and all that, but that's taking how the emotional compulsion is. It's like taking it right on. Take a look at it. What will happen to you if you don't do the thing you feel compelled to do? What will happen? Well, here's the way to find out, is like, do it. See what happens.
Do it on purpose. Yeah, do it
on purpose. Right.
Yeah.
So again, that's for me, that's among the many benefits of doing this work, is to expose these thou shalts that I have, my personal 10 commandments. Thou shalt not waste time. Oh yeah?
I had a personal 10,000 commandments.
Yeah, right.
And they were all
right. I just use the 10 commandments as a metaphor, not for the number.
Yeah, I know, but it's like thou shalt, like
I'm still finding them. I'm still discovering thou shalt nots.
Yeah. Thou shalt, the one that came to my mind just now was honor their father and their mother.
Okay. And
that one is used on children to beat them into submission. And okay, well, I don't know about you guys. I believe that was used on me to beat me into submission. Okay. Honor your father and your mother. Don't talk back. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. So what I've come to discover in this place, this lucid place that I find myself through owning my character defects, owning the end result of all the heinous behavior that I didn't want anybody to know, that everybody saw, is for me to honor my parents, is for me to become authentic.
Mm-hmm.
So in the movement towards embodiment of authenticity, becoming autonomous and a self-actualized individual, is honoring my parents. So yeah, if that's what it means to me. So yeah, I'm going to do that now. Before you said honor your mother and your father, and I was like flipping you off, and they don't deserve anything, and what the hell. Anyway, I didn't ask for life. That was my big statement. I didn't ask to be born. It's like,
right, especially to you people.
yeah, especially to you people. And I didn't have enough wherewithal to know that yeah, the you people was like correct.
Well, you know, as a trained metaphysician, there's another way that we could look at honor thy father and thy mother, which is to honor the internal father and mother.
Yeah.
To honor the mothering principle and the fathering principle that we're all born with.
Yeah.
It's part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And if I didn't get the kind of mothering that I would like to have gotten, I can call it forth now.
Yes.
In my life. And if I don't know how to do it, I can ask for help. I can set an intention to discover. I can set an intention to mother myself with tenderness and sweetness and kindness.
That's one of the principles of Adult Children of Alcoholics 12-step anonymous group, is to become your own loving parent.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Which didn't make any sense to me whatsoever when I first heard it. And now I live it. Now I am loving towards myself in a parental guiding kind of way.
We often say that the accountability practice, not in its abstract form as we saw the diagram and stuff,
Yeah.
but in its practice, done in group with fellow travelers, is how we learn to reparent ourselves.
Yes.
It's not necessarily the only tool, but it's a great tool.
Yeah.
For learning that. So oftentimes people go, I don't know how to reparent myself. I say, oh, it's a great place to start.
Right.
That's the truth.
Which is counterintuitive, because the first thing you do in naming your truth is talk about your character defects, which is what they always pointed out to you. It's like counterintuitive. And yet when I'm nurturing myself and I'm like that parent that the child dropped the glass going, ooh, I bet that was scary. Don't move. There's glass on the floor. Let's take care of it.
Right.
Instead of you dumb, don't move, don't, now I got all the stuff that.
Oh, you're going to cut yourself. Then I'm going to take you to the hospital. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just like to point out to the people watching this, look how easy it was for me to pull that stuff out.
Yeah.
It's still in there, like completely in the memory tape.
And we're going to go to the poorhouse because we can't afford the doctor. The hospital charges too much. Yeah, it's just on and on and on. Yeah.
By the way, you can do this at home. You can call up your own hostile, self-hating, critical parent voice with utter ease.
Yeah,
and if you can't, you're one of the blessed few that didn't have that experience.
Yep.
So there's something else I want to raise here before we run out of time.
Okay.
Give me a second to get it here. So this was something that's been raised by somebody in our group, and that is that one of your mentors, Gabor Mate, has produced a film called The Wisdom of Trauma, and it's up for broadcast starting the 28th of July, as you can see there on the screen, between July 28th and August 1st. And I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the folks who watch this. This was originally broadcast last month, and the fellow traveler who recommended this told us that she found it to be utterly fascinating, useful, engaging, insightful. And so I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. And maybe for those who don't know him, John, you could talk a little bit about Dr. Mate.
Yeah, Dr. Gabor Mate was in palliative care And he also worked for 12 years in Vancouver on the streets with the homeless population, addicted, homeless people, in a program that in Canada, they housed them, and the prerequisite wasn't you had to quit using. It was just to get the people off the streets. And then Gabriel Mate worked with these people over a 12-year period, and he discovered that each and every one of them had suffered severe childhood trauma, and that was the main cause. And his statement is, whatever is in your current reality that's discordant, and you don't want it, and you recognize you don't want it, stems from complicated post-traumatic stress disorder that we received in our childhood. And that's the conclusion I came to in my own practice, in my own recovery, is that everything that manifested in me as far as being violent, emotionally, verbally, physically, isolated, alone, compulsive, addictive behaviors stem from that unresolved trauma that I received as a child. And I've seen the movie, the documentary, and it's excellent. Yeah, I would suggest anybody that can and is able and is curious about, why do I do what I do when I don't want to do it? This will give you a clue as to the motivation for any behavior, whether it's a disempowering attitude that you have towards yourself or others, was obsessive compulsive behavior, addiction. And addiction could also include shoe shopping if it becomes something that is compulsive, up to
Serial murder.
Sure, yeah.
Genocide.
Genocide. Yeah, on a national global scale, same reason.
Yeah.
Same, you can boil it back down to complicated post-traumatic stress syndrome endured as a child, the trauma endured as a child, and then the stress of that trauma being unrelieved, creating the discordance. I want to say discordance because that covers anything you want to say, that you find in your adult life. So just, it's so profoundly simple and yet so very difficult to rationalize, comprehend, and then move towards the relief, which in intentional living is just simply owning where you find yourself without blame or judgment, no blame or judgment.
So those who'd like to check this out, you could just Google "The Wisdom of Trauma" is the name of the feature, "The Wisdom of Trauma," and go to this webpage here, and information on how to access the film will be there. So just wanted to share that with folks. You still there?
I am. I was just in the
Good
moment there.
One thing that I wanted to maybe end with is in this book, this goes back to what you were just saying in your comment on Dr. Mate and his work. He has some suggestions on dealing with complex PTSD that are really interesting because they hint around accountability without ever landing there.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, and it's a shame. You know, nothing's wrong, obviously, but it would be interesting. So he says, this is a list of 13 practical steps for helping you manage an emotional flashback. So that's what he's focusing on here, is that burnt toast syndrome.
Right.
And all of them, what they miss is how to access the emotional compulsiveness. So say to yourself, I'm having a flashback. Okay. Remind yourself, I feel afraid, but I'm not in danger. Own your right and need to have boundaries. Speak reassuringly to the inner child. Deconstruct eternity thinking. Remind yourself that you are in an adult body. Ease back into your body. Now there's the flirtation with accountability. Resist the inner critic's drasticizing and catastrophizing. Well, how do you do that if the feeling is so overwhelmingly compulsive? You don't sit there and have a rational conversation with that energy. Allow yourself to grieve, cultivate safe relationships, and seek support. Learn to identify the types of triggers that lead to flashbacks. Figure out what you are flashing back to, and be patient with the slow recovery process. Again, I don't quibble with any of those things, but again, what accountability allows me to do is to go to the emotional source. That's the wellspring of that experience, because it's not to be argued with or intellectualized. It doesn't work.
It's like going to a workshop and having this feeling of elation and connectedness, and going home and then a week later back into all the old behaviors and then doing that again, and not being able to retain it.
Yeah.
The accountability tree process, no blame, no judgment, owning the end result of the trauma hooks into the event of the trauma. And when I say then, I mean, it is my intent to be kind, transforms the trauma, and then sets it back down into that subconscious pool of information. And then I simply pay attention to what I notice that is different. I would like to say that what my experience of this accountability tree process is what the alchemists used to talk about, or maybe still, about the alchemic chamber of turning lead, mean, into gold. It is my intent to be kind, and it's all self-contained in my body, that I have now accessed that alchemic chamber, that place where I identify lead. I mean, when they put the lead, I'm just like kind of figure out what the hell they were doing, but when they put the lead into the hermetic chamber, they had to say that it was lead. They couldn't like, oh, I'm going to pick up this, oh, we're going to call this lead, and then we'll see what happens. The identification of the end result of the trauma, lead, mean, in alignment with the trauma, the breath, the emotion comes up, it is my intent to be kind, fuses, happens for me, goes back down into my subconscious, and I find myself presenting differently. Not better. Sometimes it wasn't better. Sometimes it was more frustrating, differently. And then in that frustration, sometimes frustration, I would be able to then do it again. And then after a while, I had brief moments of peace and genuineness, but then I find myself in this place where I have brief moments of violence and or discord. And then as soon as that happens, oh, another opportunity. I'm going to take this piece of lead, set it in this chamber, say what I want. That's an emotional experience. It's not cognitive, it's not rational nor logical. And yet the demonstration of its effectiveness is instantaneous in my life.
The irony is what's absolutely historically beautiful about what you're saying is that the alchemists of the Middle Ages, of whom the most prominent was Isaac Newton. Did you know that Newton was an alchemist?
No.
Yeah,
actually,
he spent half of his life doing optics and gravity, and the other half doing alchemy. And the the truth is that these alchemists were all coming from an understanding that physical reality had a dimension in the spiritual realm, and that alchemy could only
Yes.
occur because there was an access to the spiritual essence of these materials, not the gross,
Right.
not the gross presentation, but the spiritual presentation. So they were looking for, how do we access the spiritual substance, the unifying substance? Well, that's what we're doing here. The same thing is we're
Yes.
taking this into
Yes.
a much more refined realm of love and truth and patience and reality, so that the lead of this character defect becomes the gold of the character asset. It's the same thing. It's just been through consciousness. Now, consciousness is where the shift is. And so what you said is, that's exactly what those guys were. They believed the same principle. They just had different understandings of what that meant and so forth. And they went about it slightly differently, but this is what they were going for.
So my experience along these lines has given me the awareness that in my emotional body, not my rational thinking mind,
Right.
that is the source point of my spiritual self or spiritual side of life. So in my human being, planet Earth, carbon-based life forms, biochemical, electromagnetic being, motivated and operated through emotional impulse. If I get into that emotional impulse, it gives me access to that unknown, mysterious place. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to describe it. I'm in it. And this process happens spiritually, mind, body, spirit.
Can't say fairer than that.
Okay, I think that was my last statement for the day.
Well, and how timely. So it's been an hour. So again, we'd like to let everyone know that if you'd like to participate in this work, then at the end of the podcast, John's email address and mine are there, and you can contact us, and we'll be happy to direct you to meetings that we facilitate along with other colleagues of ours that are trained in this. And we have meetings Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at different times. So please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'd love to have you join us and have you experience this for yourself, experience this alchemy of transforming all of the sense of dread and fear and grief and loss that may be motivating you into a sense of endless dawn and the joy of being this blessed, unique person that you are.
Yeah, and I just want to put a caveat that you can come and check us out. You could blank out your screen, change your name, do whatever you want. You can just watch us do this. So you don't have to like come on and then we're gonna like talk you out of something or. Okay.
Amen.
I just wanted to put that in.
I appreciate that. AKA, we intend that this be a safe space for those of us that are still reluctant but feel compelled to seek something different.
Right.
So it's not easy. It's not easy, my friends, and I certainly understand people's reluctance, and it's okay. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, John, and
you too, Marty.
Look forward to doing this again next week.
You got it.
All right. Take care.
Okay.